Welcome to episode 11 of the MDF Midseason Team Reviews. We are looking at AdrianSilver, currently sitting with a 5-11 record, coming off of a 2-0 week, implied record of 6.1 to 9.9. This squad has been probably the most disappointing squad this year as far as record now versus what was expected coming into the year. Uh, that can be attributed to a lot of things, a combination of injuries, underperformance, bad luck in head-to-head matchups. Um, but we'll look at that in a moment here. Currently, points for 825 is significantly better than the other squads at 5-11 or worse. So that kind of speaks to some of the bad luck in head-to-head matchups. Though the squad has missed median by very narrow margins a number of weeks as well. 2-6 against the median, while going 3-5 in head-to-head matchups. Points against 948 is second most in the league, trailing only Coach by 9 points. So it's been tough sledding in those head-to-head matchups. Max points for 1030 with a realized points of 80. Good max points for, not great. Believe it ranks 8th or 7th in the league. Realized points 80%, not the most efficient squad, which a little more efficiency and may not find ourselves in the situation of needing to run the table to even have a chance at the playoffs. Strength of schedule has been difficult thus far, third hardest strength of schedule to open the season here, though the stretch is a lot easier with the fifth easiest schedule down the stretch. This is a squad that on paper looks very good, has a lot of talent, and with a weak schedule down the stretch, could conceivably run the table or close to it, giving them an opportunity at the playoffs. But given how a lot of their players have performed thus far and the injury woes that have plagued this team, it's just not something that can be realistically expected to happen. Uh, if we're gonna try and lay some blame at how we got here, and we have to start with the recently traded Deshaun Watson. 0.28 warp thus far. He's only played 3 games and a little bit. That little bit game, though, was truly detrimental. Coming in, throwing a pick, putting up minus points, and doing all of this while in the starting lineup for I believe, about 4-point loss in a head-to-head matchup. Um, 0.28 warp looks pretty good on paper when we consider what some of the warps we've seen are, but that's good for QB 28, tied with Gardner Minshew. So not something that's helping you win. At 15 points per game, that's good for QB 26. So even when Watson has been out there, it hasn't been overly helpful. Um, Add to that, we've got the Pittsburgh backfield, where going into the season, one could realistically expect that between Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, whoever the lead back is going to be productive. Someone you can start on a week to week basis, and if either gets hurt, it only gets better for the other that remains. It has not been that way. Both have remained healthy, and both have remained unhelpful in terms of winning fantasy weeks. Najee has a negative 0.02 warp, while Jaylen Warren has a negative 0.03 warp, averaging 8.7 and 8.8 points respectively. Good for RB 41 and RB 39. Neither is helping. So it's just a cesspool of Matt Canada and bad O line and just a team that's struggling in general. Um, we have a second Watson and Christian Watson that additionally has been unhelpful when playing and injured the other half of the time. In 4 games played, Christian Watson has put forward a negative 0.04 warp, 7.9 points per game, good for wide receiver 59. So in the same boat as players listed previously. And then we've got Pat Fryermuth doing the same, playing 4 games, otherwise being injured, putting forward a negative warp. And 6.6 points per game, good for tight end 28. Can't even break into the tight end 2 category. So You add to these players Aaron Rodgers being injured first quarter, first game. Uh, so that QB2 spot, which should have been extremely solid between Deshaun Watson and Aaron Rodgers, just completely has abandoned this team. Um, Darren Waller is now hurt. Guess he saw that potentially Danny DeVito's throwing on the ball, and this, his body just gave up. He had stayed healthy. Daniel Jones' injury hadn't phased him, with Tyrod Taylor functioning relatively well, but it seemed inevitable that Darren Waller was going to join the injury corps this squad, and he has now done that. And this all has conspired to waste Jalen Hurts' season thus far. Currently the top work player in the league through 8 weeks. An absolute monster. It's just not getting enough from the other positions. Um, Looking at the top dynasty assets for the squad, we have a extremely young and talented core of Jalen Hurts, CeeDee Lamb, Jahmyr Gibbs, Drake London, recently acquired in the Deshaun Watson trade, and Dalton Kincaid. Add to that, we've got a first round pick and 2 second round picks in the 2024 rookie draft, as well as some late round picks. This squad has a lot of potential for next year. I mean, it had a lot of potential for this year, and that potential hasn't really gone anywhere. Yes, there's been a lot of injuries. Yes, there's been a lot of underperformance, but there's still a ton of talent on the squad. And you add to that picks projected to be 106, 206, 207, where you can get productive players or use those picks to trade for productive players. And it wouldn't be a surprise to see this squad coming into next season as a preseason darling once again. Looking at the warp, we've got Jalen Hurts, Kirk Cousins, who is now out for the season, recently acquired. He was doing great, and you can understand why Shabalski has to make that trade. You lose Kirk Cousins and his 1.15 warp. You potentially lose Matthew Stafford, and you got to do something to try and remain competitive with an uber competitive top half of this league. Jahmyr Gibbs recently coming on, probably most of that warp is from this past week. CeeDee Lamb is CeeDee Lamb. I mean, it could be better if the Cowboys' offense could be a little bit more consistent, but he's a monster. And then you've got some really good potential trade deadline targets. Chris Godwin could definitely be a piece that helps a contending squad that either suffers an injury or just wants some more consistency in a flex position. Darren Waller, should he get healthy, remains a productive piece to plug in at tight end, a position where it is difficult to get consistent and predictable production. Drake London, also recently acquired, not going anywhere. You got to imagine that's a piece to build around, and then it kind of just falls off. You got Tyson Bagent from his short stint here as Chicago Bears starter while Justin Fields is out. Dalton Kincaid, who probably accumulated all of that warp in his recent performances with Dawson Knox out. Darrell Henderson, and that Darrell Henderson, should he remain the starter with the Rams for the remainder of the season, is an interesting piece. He's something that might be able to move for a late round pick to a contender looking for a little bit of depth. It's not probably not doing the squad any good down the stretch, but it's just one of those guys that you never know. Like, volume is king when it comes to running back, and in a league where timeshares are the norm, if you get a guy in a Sean McVay offense that is getting a large snap share, he's always going to have a little bit of value to anyone who's trying to win right now. I don't think it's like really a true possibility, but I do suspect the squad might be able to make some hay down the stretch. The record will probably climb closer to 500. Ultimately, though, it's likely we see 500 as kind of a best case scenario. That's not going to make the playoffs the way things are shaping out this year. Having traded away Watson for Cousins does hamper that a little bit, but I mean, that wasn't running the table, making the playoffs wasn't a realistic goal. If you have an opportunity to improve your squad for the next season when you're at a 5-11 record, you got to take it. And I think it was an interesting roll of the dice. Kirk Cousins' recovery probably takes him into next year. he doesn't have a contract for next season, so he's more than likely on a new squad, unable to participate in training camp. Kirk Cousins is an ultimate wild card in this situation. Um, eh, I mean, between the Achilles boys here, Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, you have to imagine this team will have one solid QB2 going into next year to try and support Jalen Hurts being an absolute beast. And if that is true, and we can see some bounce backs from some of these talented players that have underperformed this year, uh, this squad is going to be back at the top of the league or competing to do so in the next season. Till next one, I'm out.